I started thinking back to those early days, and I recall, actually, when I was in the law department, one of my first assignments was working on some of the low-income housing buildings that we'd financed through tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, that were beginning to go bad. And LISC had been so helpful, Marilyn's nodding her head, in getting those buildings going. But what we were finding is that we had these buildings in isolation, to use the word, Michael, that you used in my introduction, and we really hadn't focused on the neighborhood surrounding those buildings. And so although we took care of the bricks and mortar, we didn't really focus on the human capital. And so it was that experience that I think I brought with me to the planning department. And I give Mayor Daley, who I'm glad to hear is one of your co-chairs, a lot of credit for really encouraging me to take a step back and look not just at what the planning and development department would do to help spur development, but to really look at it holistically and comprehensively. And we started out with this program, I know a few of you will remember, called SNAP, Strategic Neighborhood Action Plan, where we've targeted resources from the building department and the housing department and the transportation department and the planning department, all in a geographic area, working, of course, with the community, since we were convinced early on that bottoms-up planning is the only way to have sustainable and healthy communities. And we really began the very first time that we targeted resources in the city of Chicago. And so, and I recall, and many of you will as well, that President Obama, then I think State Senator Obama, gave the remarks, some of you are nodding, at the Futures Conference, was really our attempt at LISC to think about broadening our horizon and going beyond just housing and thinking about what the future of LISC would be and what it is today, which is, again, of course, looking much more comprehensively at neighborhood development. And the president's in LA today, so I was talking to him this morning, and I told him where I was coming, and he just started laughing, and he said, well, aren't you lucky that you get to go and talk to the organization that, of course, you spent so much of your life with? And I don't think I have to remind anyone in this room that part of the reason why he was so willing to come to the Futures Conference and participate is that he started his career as a community organizer on the south side of Chicago, helping people who had lost their jobs when the steel mills closed. I see Jim Capera nodding his head, because of course he worked very closely in the same neighborhoods. And the one thing that the president and I have always said over the last nearly 20 years that I've known him is that we never, ever wanted to work for the federal government, of course, because the federal government was the enemy. And he, when he was a community organizer, and me, when I was in the Department of Planning, railed against the federal government, and for all the reasons that I think we are gathered here today to celebrate this new institute, and it's because it was too siloed, and it was because we found that we were being required to tailor our unique plans for our neighborhoods into these federal programs, as opposed to making the federal programs tailor their needs to the neighborhoods. And we used to just pound on HUD, and we would pound on all of the other departments, and we would say, can't you guys get your act together and think comprehensively across all the various federal departments? And of course the answer was no. And much as we tried all those many years, we were unable to get it together. So now we get to do it. And it's hard, let me tell you. There's a reason why they didn't do it all those years. But I know you heard from Adolfo this morning, and we, as the president committed during the campaign and as he delivered as soon as we arrived in Washington, we created this White House Office of Urban Affairs. And I know Derek also has already spoken, who is our partner in the Domestic Policy Council. And our goal there, as I know Adolfo said to you, is to make sure that the federal government corrects all those many complaints that we had when the president and I were working at the local level, and to think strategically across all of the departments. And one thing that's really helpful in that effort is that we have, I'll begin with our own very own Arnie Duncan as the Secretary of Education, and obviously education plays a vital role in everything that we're doing in community development. And then we also have Sean Donovan as the Secretary of HUD, and there's nothing like having somebody who, again, worked on the ground, running the New York housing agency, who had all the same concerns about HUD that we had. And so you can just imagine the conversations we have about, yes, we've got to fix that, and we've got to fix that, and we've got to make sure we don't do this. But I think a key part of my message to you today is that, and I'm not just saying this because I'm now working at the federal government, but the federal government can only do but so much. And that what we've realized here at the national level is what, of course, LISC has been a part of all along, and that is leveraging what government can do at the local, state, and federal level, and making sure that we have intermediaries and we have local stakeholders. And I looked over the list of everyone's here today, and we have everybody from elected officials to banks to developers to foundations, all of the key ingredients that we've learned over the last 20 years that are so important to be a part of the dialogue and be a part of creating healthy, sustainable communities. And I think that, as I think back on my work in Chicago, I think I always think about my grandfather, who was Robert Taylor, and who the most infamous housing project probably in the world was named after, and it was the exact opposite of what he believed in. And he was chairman of the Chicago Housing Authority back in the 40s and 50s, and he resigned out of frustration because he couldn't get the local government to appreciate that what we needed to be building were mixed income communities that had everything that anybody else would want. So not just the bricks and mortar, but parks and recreation and good school systems and somewhere to shop and somewhere where children felt safe to play, and where you had abandoned buildings were torn down or rehabilitated, as opposed to just building new buildings, building on the assets in the community, looking for institutions that anchor the community. And I see Hank Weber here, and although you turncoat and left Chicago too, I know that you are still absolutely committed with your new institution to being an anchor in a community, and that you really have to support those anchors. And it's all those different building blocks that pull together that really create the kind of sustainable communities that I know everyone in this room is committed to having. And I see you guys nodding, so I really do feel like I'm preaching to the choir. But when I first heard that you were thinking of forming this institute, I thought, what a perfect partner for us to have at the national level, because a big part of what the Office of Urban Affairs is hoping to do is not just break down the silos and make sure that we at the federal government are providing the kind of comprehensive and integrated approach to our allocation of resources and programs that you desperately call for, but that we also have a place where it's a laboratory, where we can highlight best practices, where we can actually teach and focus on the skill of community development, and that the many success stories that we have across the country and that LISC has been a part of for so many years, and that I learned about when I joined the national board, we should be highlighting those best practices across the country, and to have an institute that's responsible for pulling all of that together and celebrating the successes and communicating those broadly across the country is the perfect partner for us to have at the national level. And so when I think about just how the stars could be aligned, that we could have a president who started as a community organizer, that you could have me, who took this leap of faith to come to Washington, a city I swore I would never live in, and that we could have all of you who come here and are willing to join together in this institute and form really the most perfect partnership we could ever imagine. And so as we look to the future, what we really want to be able to do is to make sure that the White House and that all the different agencies at the federal government, through our White House Office of Urban Affairs, are working closely with you. And also, I would mention, and something that I learned more about when I joined the National LISC office, we have a concentrated effort on our rural initiative as well. And I know that that's something that's important to LISC. And so in the White House, we're focusing not just on urban development, but also on rural development. And the president will be speaking more about that in the coming weeks ahead as summer unfolds. And I won't steal his thunder. I'll let him do that. One of the other lessons you learn. So with that, I want to congratulate you on forming this institute. I think that the leadership and the board are made up of people who actually not only understand this intellectually, but who have lived it and breathed it in the course of their careers. And we stand very willing and able at the federal level to be your partner in this effort. Anything we can do, believe me, the folks at LISC know how to reach us, and I think that you can take as a very strong signal the fact that not just that I'm here, but that Derek and Adolfo and the other folks from the administration who are here working with you today and presenting to you, but more importantly, who will be your partners going forward. We couldn't be more committed to this effort, and I am just delighted to have a chance to see all these wonderful faces. So consider this the beginning, and consider this what I hope will be another 20 years of a lengthy relationship that we have with all of you. And so when the Obama administration ends, hopefully in 7 years, and I go back to Chicago, maybe you'll ask me to join the list board again. Thank you very much.